Well, the Reformation, the Lutheran Reformation, was the second most important event in Swedish history. The most important event in Swedish history, of course, was the coming of Christianity. That made us Europeans and made Sweden part of Western civilization, to a certain extent at least. But the Reformation, the Lutheran Reformation, was also defined what Sweden is and what it is to be Swedish. Gustav Vasa, mentioned by Nordin, was the king who went through the movements of making Sweden a Lutheran country. And this fellow, Gustav Vasa, of course, is one of the really the key persons in Swedish history. In a way, he created Sweden. He broke us with Denmark. He made Sweden a national kingdom, apart from the union with Denmark and Norway. So with Gustav Vasa, Sweden becomes a national state. And that, of course, defines what it is to be a Swede, or what Sweden is. But at the same time, Reformation also made a break with Rome, with the Catholicism, and made Sweden into a northern and western European countries. There are two really important divides in Europe, of course. One is the east-west, and the other is the north-south divide. And Sweden, of course, belongs to the west of Europe and to the north of Europe. And that's because Sweden is Lutheran, a Protestant country. So this lines tells us what Sweden is. Now, Gustavus Vasa, he made this Reformation. There was a lot of resistance, not to mention Dackefejden and so on and so forth. And in fact, Gustav Vasa left to his three sons to fight it out. They were Erik, Johan, and Charles. And Johan was a dubious fellow. He had Catholic tendencies. To a certain. Yes, he married a Polish princess, and he got a son, Sigismund, who was wholly Catholic. So Charles had to intervene to save Sweden from the Roman Catholic era, so he made a rebellion, and Sigismund was disposed of. And this required another bloodbath, the second great bloodbath in Swedish history, the Linköping bloodbath, where Charles cut the heads of those who thought too well of Catholicism. And then the Swedish church had a meeting, the so-called Uppsala möte, at the end of that century, around 1600. And this Uppsala meeting was very, very important. It defined what Lutheranism should be in Sweden. There existed the Augsburgian confession, but Charles added a few points of his own to this the decision of this Uppsala meeting. And in fact, to the extent that God keeps to the decision of Uppsala meeting, we cannot be wholly certain of that, but probably if God keeps to the decision of Uppsala meeting, if you come to heaven, some of you might, you will hear a lot of Swedish spoken. Most people there will be Swedes. A few Finns, but most of them Swedes, according to Uppsala Möte's decision. So now Sweden was really Lutheran for several centuries. And not to be a good Lutheran was to be a bad Swede. So the nationality and the religious faith and confession were very much the same thing. And then, of course, Gustavus Adolphus, which we have also heard about. And he saw that, he realized that Protestantism in Sweden was threatened by the Kaiser, by the emperor, the German emperor, whose armies came closer and closer to Sweden. And they had this fellow Wallenstein, who was a very good general, and they came closer and closer. So Gustavus Adolphus intervened. He not only saved Lutheranism in Sweden, but in Germany as well. So he was really a hero. For centuries, many Germans were very strong supporters of Gustavus Adolphus. So again, Sweden's rule as a great power was very much interconnected with the Lutheran faith and the Lutheran confession. You couldn't think of Sweden without thinking of Luther and this church. Of course, another point, another very important thing is that a Roman Catholic country is a divided country. There is a king or some prince, and then there is the Pope. And sometimes the king says one thing, and then suddenly the Pope says another thing. So that's trouble, really trouble. Gustavus Vasa made an end to that. He became the head of the Swedish church. So the king, the secular ruler, and the head of the church was one and the same person. So that's unity. It's the Swedes. There were no divided opinion at all, and that was what Uppsala Mötes said. From now, we have only one faith in Sweden. We all speak with the same voice. We are a unity. So that's very important. That went on for, perhaps even today. A certain legacy, at least, of that national unity. And if you try to think otherwise, or had another confession, another faith, you couldn't do that. You had to leave Sweden, or have your heads cut off, which occurred to some Catholics. And as Nathan mentioned, this catastrophe, this scandal, when the queen, the daughter of Gustavus Adolphus, became a Catholic. And of course, some Jesuits, some Spanish Jesuits, went secretly to Stockholm to have conversations with the Queen Christina. And she thought the Lutheranism boring. Catholicism was much more intellectually stimulating to her. So she went to Rome and all that. And of course, the Swedes were very, very, very angry. They were not very happy. So Charles XI and Charles XII were really Protestant kings and really Lutheran kings. So in fact, the legacy of Luther was consolidated in Sweden for several centuries. Not until, well, the late 19th century and the early 20th century, it became possible to doubt some of the dogmas of the Lutheran confession. But at the same time, I believe that the Roman Catholic remained enemies in a way. If you look at the debate in Sweden in the second half of the 20th century about the European Union, you will see that to the Social Democrats and even to some liberals and conservatives, the very fact that the European Union was founded by Catholics, some of them very confessing Catholics, really was a good reason why Sweden could not join the European Union. That would be to join the Catholics. I think that it sounds a bit ridiculous, perhaps, but I think that was a really important factor at that time. So that's one legacy that this Protestant northern community, the Danes, the North Germans, the British, the Scots, the Americans were much more acceptable than the French or the Italians. And you know, Frenchmen and Italians really, if you think of it, you will realize that you can't trust them. It's impossible. They do, for one thing, Catholics do not take sex seriously. Not really. They have all kinds of scandals. We had a Frenchman here connected to the Swedish Academy. We had to lock him up. He didn't behave. So, in a way, it's still with us. We have forgotten the Augsburgian confession, but we still have many of the stock responses, the stock reactions against the Catholics. Think of the question of abortion, for example. You could discuss the right of abortion in several ways, but in Sweden you cannot discuss it. It's not arguments on both sides. It's just treason to question the right of abortion, and I think that's also part of this Protestant legacy, that some of the things that Catholics stand for is so really so evil, in a way evil. It's not opinion, it's alliance with the devil. And we still have some of that animosity left even today.
Has this influenced our view on Muslims, that we sort of say we should actually be Protestants in Sweden? As a consequence, we don't accept Catholics, and as a consequence, we are suspicious of other religions, including Muslims?
Are we? I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not certain it's the same thing.
It's not.
My point is that centuries of hatred against the Roman Catholic has left us a legacy.
Yes.
And we had nothing to do at all with Muslims in my childhood. Nobody had ever heard talk.
But am I arguing that a very strong Protestant identity makes you suspicious of any other religion? Yes,
I
no?
don't think so. No.
Okay, thank you. Time saved.